Welcome to 365 Christian Men, where every day we aim to inspire and encourage with real-life stories about men. September 30th, Lewis Hayden. Lewis Hayden was born a slave, but no treatment or ugly label could hold him back. When he finally escaped slavery, he dedicated his life, his time, and his skill as a businessman to serve and support those who were trapped in slavery and those who had escaped. Hayden ran a clothing store where he dressed runaway slaves, and he held meetings and campaigned against slavery. His home had a hidden tunnel connected to the Underground Railroad, a passageway to safety and freedom for escaped slaves. At Hayden's funeral, the pastor said about him, "The secret of the success in Lewis Hayden's life is that he lived for others. He was indeed a prince among us." On this date, in 1850, Lewis Hayden became the chairman of the Friends of Liberty.
Circumstances can drag a man down, but God-given dignity can lift him up. In 1811, Lewis Hayden was born a slave to a family of 25 in Lexington, Kentucky. Not an ideal situation. While he had family members all around him, life for a child slave was not safe. Lewis was property, like a dog or a hamster is property. If slave children were disobedient or showed any kind of free spirit at all, they could be beaten just like adult slaves. Their owners did not see them as human beings, just things to be used. His father was sold off first, and Lewis knew that at any time he could be sold too, or his mother or his siblings. This molded Lewis's firm belief that he was only worth what someone was willing to pay for him. When Lewis was 10, it finally happened. His owner sold all of Lewis's family to different slaveholders and traded Lewis to a traveling salesman for 2 horse carriages. In one instant, Lewis lost his entire family. He was left alone, a young slave. Not much sense of self-worth after that. Not much of anything to cling to. When he was 14, an American Revolutionary War soldier visited Kentucky, and one day he strolled past Lewis and he tipped his hat. What to most would have been a simple nod, a smile, a gesture, to Lewis Hayden, it was as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes. Someone acknowledged him as if he were a human being, a person, not a slave, not a piece of property, but a young man. This simple gesture from a total stranger sparked something in Lewis. For the first time in life, he recognized his own value. Not just that, but the value his Father in heaven had for him. He was of worth in God's eyes. He clung to that. Not that Lewis's troubles magically disappeared. They didn't. He was still a slave, but he was a slave who, with that simple acknowledgement, began to change. He now had a belief in himself as a man. This stayed with him. A few years later, he approached Lewis Baxter, an insurance office clerk, and Thomas Grant, an oil manufacturer, and asked if they would buy him and hire him to make money for them and let him keep some of his earnings to eventually buy his own freedom. The men accepted, and Lewis was hired out as a waiter at the Phoenix Hotel in Lexington. And now, knowing his own value as a man, he worked hard and began to save for his own freedom. Then in 1844, Lewis, still a slave working at the hotel and now married with a stepson, both of them slaves, and fearing his family could be separated, met another man who loved God. A Methodist minister involved in the Underground Railroad, Lewis asked the pastor to help them escape. The minister asked Lewis, "Why do you want your freedom?" Lewis replied, "Because I am a man." No longer a slave, a man, the minister agreed to help Lewis and his family escape via the Underground Railroad. It is amazing when a man finally recognizes his own worth, gains self-respect, and how it can affect the lives of others. In Jeremiah 29:11, God tells us, "I know the plans I have in mind for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for peace, not disaster, to give you a future filled with hope." Many men, like you, may feel like a slave to their circumstances. When Lewis Hayden saw himself through God's eyes, it changed his life and the lives of those around him. What is keeping you from seeing yourself through God's eyes? Circumstances can drag a man down, but dignity can lift him up.
Thank you for listening to today's story. Every day of the year, our hope is to inspire you with real-life stories of faithful men who have gone before us. Today's story was about a man who isn't as well known as some, but his story proves that God uses ordinary men in many different ways to accomplish His purposes. Is there a man whose story has inspired you, but most people have never heard his story? We would like to hear his story and maybe include him in 365 Christian Men. Please visit our website to share the story of a man who has inspired you, and join us tomorrow at 365christianmen.com.